Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight for this educational knowledge. The one thing is that we're going to get into some clarification on the 4th to the 14th Amendment, and that goes back to why the Second and First Amendment are so important. Because the Fourth Amendment, when it comes down to search and seizure, let me clarify, we are not attorneys, we're not lawyers, we are not judges, we are not anything to do with the corporation system. So I want to make sure that is clear to you folks so that way you comprehend that we're not playing this game of the corporation structure. We are not playing a game. We're out here trying to educate you on your rights. And there's a lot of people out there that have videos on the Fourth Amendment that will tell you, oh, the cops could search your car with probable cause. No, they cannot. Let's get that one clarified right off the top, because they cannot search your vehicle without a warrant. But the other point is that if you are a corporation citizen under the 14th Amendment, they can search your car if you're elected and public employee. If you are a registered church member, a registered voter. And so that's one thing that people have got to start realizing. If you don't file your rights, stand up for your rights, claim your rights to own yourself, own your property, own your children, own the circumstances around you. See, that's the one thing that you have to come to the compromisation of your mind to realize the truth of the matter that we're dealing with. And that is the one thing that you need to comprehend these things. Because once you start realizing that you have rights versus privileges, or privileges that so long as that you pay the court system and you pay the structure, they administratively have to protect you unless you've committed a felony. And so that is the one thing that people have got to start comprehending, what the real truth is compared to what they're living in their minds, what they've been told. And a lot of these videos are out there run by democracy, and they're not going to tell you the truth. That's why what's going on in the country is people are going nuts right now in the country because they're screaming and yelling because of what the corporation president is doing to the country, for the country. And that is the one thing that you have to realize, what Trump is doing for your rights and what he's doing with immigration. Now, you got all these left-wing senators out there going off and saying we need to protect these immigrants, but we don't want to protect your Fourth Amendment rights. And that is what the truth is. They don't want to protect your rights. And so once you start comprehending the Democratic Party and democracy is not for you, and it even says that with Thomas Jefferson's speech, dealing with when they put the House and Senate together. And it's compromising and understanding and comprehension of the truth of what really happened in our system. Because the Democrats have been changing things since basically the late 1890s. And see, people don't, that actually started in 1878 when the American Bar Association of the British government was put in place. Now, the forefathers back then knew this stuff in the 1890s, but that was the one thing that a lot of people didn't comprehend. They didn't get what was really going on. And that's the other point. A lot on the other side did comprehend. That's why they were paid heavy. That's why they had their, family set up like they have today, because of the wealth that they accumulated by rape, robbing, and pillaging, because that's what a democracy does. They rape and rob and pillage from you. And that is the one thing that you have to realize, that these men and women do this purposely. So that is the one thing that you want to make sure that you have your rights protected. or your immigration privileges protected. See, if you don't protect your rights and if you don't protect the structure, nobody's going to do it for you. So the Fourth Amendment, and I'm going to get into a court case here that just happened a couple of weeks ago, literally. And I'm going to get into that one here in a minute. But I want you to realize that when you start looking at all this stuff and comprehending these things of what transpires to protect your right as a lawful bloodline Native American versus citizen, small c citizen, of the Corporation of Immigration. And remember, all elected and public employees, when they take a job description as a public servant, they, even if their bloodline goes back 1,000 years or whatever, they give up their constitutional rights and it turns into a privilege. And so that's the one thing that they're not going to tell you this stuff, because if you knew this stuff, you know, we wouldn't be being pulled over, harassed. We wouldn't be going through these stuff like, you know, people getting pulled over and then the cops are saying, well, we have a right to search a vehicle or we have a right to search your house. Well, when they have to file an affidavit in court, and sometimes they can put an emergency warrant. But in that warrant, it has to be specifically specified the area that they are looking for. It has to be specifically filed of what they want. And so that is the one thing that you have to realize when they come. It's like DHS, when they come knocking on your door, says, well, we're here to look at your kid because somebody made a complaint. We want to make sure your kid's all right. Well, you don't let them in your home. You tell them to go get a warrant. You want an affidavit signed by a living man or woman. And the main thing is, remember, a DHS employee, a cop, a judge, attorney, lawyers, anybody in the legal system, court system, cannot write an affidavit and file an affidavit. They have no authority to do this. They cannot file it, because they are an artificial corporation. Artificial means they don't exist. And so when these things come to light and you start standing up for your Fourth Amendment right, not privilege, because privilege follows under immigration. And so we want to make sure that people comprehend the separation of lawful and legal. And that's what your Constitution separates, lawful and legal. And that even goes back to immigration, going back to 1770. Remember, we've been fighting the British government for, I don't know, since the 13th century when they started coming over here. The British, and not only the British, we've been fighting, what is that called? I believe it's called the Spaniards. So when these foreign countries come over and they do all these treaties and people say that, we have a right. Hate to say this, you don't have a right. So until you comprehend that your right is a privilege, and your privilege doesn't exist, and that's the one thing that you have to compromise your understanding, comprehending your understanding of what you're saying. Especially when you're dealing with a public servant, when a cop pulls you over and goes, well, I want to search, I want this. Well, first off, I would always suggest that, okay, then what is the crime I've committed? Don't you understand that you traveled, you ran a red light, you were caught speeding? I didn't ask you that. Where's the injured party? Where is the structure on the affidavit? Where is the filing on this? See, this is the one thing that people have got to start asking these questions. Because like a DHS worker comes to your house and they say, well, we're here to take your kid. Well, I don't think so. Because my kid is my property. My property is owned by me, not you. And once you start realizing that you have rights, not privileges, and you stand up for your rights, we're going to get a lot further in this world.
Oh, yeah, this
under the
video
14th Amendment, you have the right of the people to be secure in your persons, houses, papers effects against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be violated. And in a warrant, no warrant shall be issued without probable cause, and that means they can't just sit there and say, I have probable cause to think you got a joint or something. It doesn't work that way. They have to produce what they're claiming. And so when they don't produce this stuff to you and they're claiming that they have these rights, it doesn't work that way, because they don't have a right to come in and search your home. They don't have a right to come in and ask to see your children. That's the one thing that I do suggest, that people pay attention to their children when they're out playing and the circumstances of those things, because it's up to you to pay attention to these things. It's your responsibility to pay attention to what a public servant is doing or what they're filing, because even your Fourth Amendment right gets filed in the court system when the county clerk alters your paperwork when it goes into the court system or your filings. And see, that's the one thing that people need to realize and comprehend the structure when these things come down to the realization of your rights versus privileges. And so when you get into the system and you start getting into privileges, you start losing your rights when you start sitting there, I'm a privileged personnel, or I'm a United States citizen, or I'm a resident. See, these are key words that they play on our mind so that way they could literally entrap us. And that's how the Supreme Courts make some of these rulings that they do. Because when the Supreme Courts make these rulings that, they have a right to search you or do this or probable cause wasn't done, you have to look at the research, and you want to look at the court cases on probable cause too. What has happened? Who filed what? Who did what? How did the court handle that? Was it an opinion, or did the judge actually go by Constitution law? And that's the one thing, when you do filings in the court system and you get paperwork back and the judge says, well, we don't want no part of this. Well, I don't care if the judge says he doesn't want any part of it. The judge has to go through the structure and knowing the structure of his wording in the Constitution. That is his employment. That's what he gets paid the de facto paperwork for, called Federal Reserve notes. And so once you start realizing what Federal Reserve notes really are and how they affect you, and that's where it comes in, because everybody keeps going, oh, the national debt. Well, the national debt is raised by Federal Reserve notes, because Federal Reserve notes is the structure from the Federal Reserve. And so that is the structure of the Federal Reserve. And so when you do this stuff, it is a structure that you need to comprehend what the real truth is, what you're going through on these things. So when you file your rights versus a privilege, it's knowing what court to file it in too. That's part of your Fourth Amendment rights, to protect yourself. You have to determine what court it is. You have to prove what court you're filing in. So if you're filing in a corporation court, an Article I court, compared to the Article III court, and we do have paperwork that'll be coming out on that eventually here, that's going to show you the separation that explains it very well. But that is the one thing that you have to comprehend, these things of how these things work. And so that is the one thing that is blessing, that, having the Constitution. We are the only place in the universe that has a Constitution that gives us the right from, free speech, the right from religion. Because if you want to believe in religion, that's your right. But I don't believe in what you believe, and most people don't believe in what you probably believe. And so that is what we call a right of freedom of your mind. So you have mind freedom, and you have to know how to use it. And that is definitely educating yourself on these circumstances of what, why, and how. compromising in your mind to know that you have to start to realize these things. Because when you have a public servant coming to your door, or pulling you over, or sometimes they'll, when you're walking down the street, they want to engage in conversations, which I don't contract. First word when they would say, I would like to talk to you or whatever, I said, I don't contract. And I don't know if the information you're giving me is correct or not. So I prefer not to say anything, and if you want, go get a warrant. So you don't have to comply with these, what they call orders. And that is the one thing that you have to realize, that these things are orders. It's like when you go in a restaurant, you're ordering food. So when you do an order, you shall pay for that order, if it's what you have to pay for. But when a judge gives you an order and you disagree with it, you have to write back to him that you disagree with that order. You have to clarify and ask him. He has to clarify what, why, and how his decisions were made. He has to clarify those things. He can't just put out an opinion or a thought. He has to explain it versus statute codes and administrative rules versus the constitutional law. And so that is the one thing of realizing what the constitutional law is compared to what people think is, I have to do what these people tell me. No, you do not have to do what these people tell you. And see, that is the one thing that when people get going through all this craziness and you get these answers from these public servants, that's why, it's been highly suggested. Everybody keeps saying, well, I got a right to travel. I got a right to do this. I got a right to do that. Do you have it certified by the court system? Do you have a certified letter from the House and Senate confirming that you have the right that you're claiming? Because, see, people go, well, I have a right to travel. I have a right to do this. Well, who confirmed it? See, if you are still a 13th and 14th, mainly a 14th Amendment corporation citizen, how are you supposed to be in the real world when it comes down to it? I really would like you to think about that, because, see, when it comes down to, when people want to sit there and question, do I have to comply with this administrative rule or not? Well, yeah, it depends if you are a citizen of the corporation under the 14th Amendment, or if you're under the Constitution that has rights, not privileges. That's why I always bring up to people every time I talk to them, do you know if you're lawful and legal? And I've had so many people say, well, what does that have anything to do with things? It has everything to do with it. It has everything to do why you're in this country or not. That's why immigration is a big topic right now for the first time in 40 years. Because we never had the immigration problem. We've had, over 100 million people come into this country eating our food, living off the structure, not protecting their children, putting them on what they call welfare. And there is no such thing as welfare technically when it comes down to it. That's the one thing that people get confused on, because the welfare is not for immigrants at all. And the other point is, how come we're not having our public employees and our churches and these public buildings? How come they're not greenery? We got to put in, lawns, grass, seeds. So when people do this stuff and not paying attention to what's really going on around them, this is what we're having the problems with. That's why your Fourth Amendment right gives you the right of your First and Second, your Third, your Seventh, and Ninth. See, it's really reading these amendments of how it really does affect you yourself, and, you. You have to realize that the Fourth Amendment, and I'm going to pull this up here in a minute because I want to get into this one here, because I want to make sure that this is publicly known, because the Seventh Circuit Court just came out and stated. And that's the one thing that I want people to realize, that the smart meters that they put on your home, and you wonder why you got ringing in the ears and why you're so sleepy and tired and drugged on, and why you're not have a lot of this stuff happening for you. Because you're giving up your rights, or you gave them up, or you never filed for them and claimed them, or you never filed to own your child, because that's the one thing that people have to realize, that you have to own your property. Your child is your property. It's your bloodline. It's your factual structure that you are leaving a heritage. And without that heritage, you don't exist. Without that bloodline, you have no future. There is no future for you without the bloodline. And that's the one thing that people say, well, my bloodline only goes back to, let's say, the 1920s. Well, that depends on your fifth generation, how it was filed in Ellis Island or something like that. You know, prior to the 1900s, you know, we did still have constitution rights, but that's the one thing that the Democratic Party started giving away. And remember, most of all, the Democrats don't care about you. Most of the elected and public employees don't care about you, because they're working on de facto funding. De facto money doesn't exist. And once you comprehend that the de facto system technically does not exist and is not there for your benefit, and once you realize that it's not there for your benefit, and you start realizing what's going on, you're going to be so much further ahead. You're going to have your rights protected. And that's the one thing that is a fact. And once you realize that you have to file for you, you have to own you. Because if you don't sit there and claim your rights, you have no Fourth Amendment, you have no Second, Third, or Fourth Amendment, Fifth, or any amendments to the Constitution. And the Supreme Court has said differently in some things, but that depends on the way the elected and public employee, the judge, a.k.a. servant, to the people of the lawful bloodline, reads your case, how he's going to react to it. And that's the one thing, that when you file these court cases that people file, you have to learn how to file what court you're filing in. And if you're going with the, all capital United States court system, you're going to be in an Article I court. That's just reality. Upper and lower case, separating the structure, so that way you go to an Article III court, but also, too, you have to go verify if the judge has an oath. You have to verify the judge's bond, his service contract. And if he's a city or county judge, what contract does he have with the city or county? Because even though he took an oath, he has to have a contract with that city or county. Oh, that's called for retirement purposes. So he gets his retirement paycheck. So it is important to ask these contracts, and you always want to put it in the Freedom of Information Act. Because once you start putting it in the Freedom of Information Act and they don't start responding to you, then you have to file on them criminally for failing to do their job. Yes, you heard me. First. Doesn't apply to the second, third, or whatever. They have to apply to the Constitution first, not their other contracts they have. Those other contracts are for administrative rulings for the 13th Amendment citizens and 14th Amendment citizens. And that's corporation citizen. And that's the one thing that the birth certificate, when they started using the birth certificate realistically in the 1900s, because prior to that, birth certificates weren't done, and I always love when people say, well, they used to always file it in the Bible, but natives didn't have a Bible. So most natives didn't have Bibles in this country. Bibles were introduced after we were invaded from England, called the Vatican. And so the Bible started becoming a piece to mind control that has been implemented on the uneducated who don't know the Constitution, or how our treaties work to protect the Constitution and the treaties of the native bloodline natives. And it doesn't mean that, it's just Indian that is a bloodline native. So once you realize that a bloodline native is more than just Indian, and people say, oh, no, it's just Indian, that is not true. So we've had different color and creeds on this soil for the last several hundred or 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years. So you're filing to prove your bloodline. And once you establish that your bloodline is lawful, not legal. Legal is British administrative rules, for those who don't know it. And they are British administrative rules. And you have to realize that British administrative rules in Article 1 courts run under, what do they call that? The Vatican, under religious points of view. So that means religion doesn't give you rights. Religion only gives you privileges. And people will sit there and go, well, I like to have this privilege. Well, okay, go have a privilege. I want my rights installed. Like the Fourth Amendment, that gives me the right not to be searched, seized, or harassed. Technically, it's called being raped, too. Because if you are strip searched, that's a rape. They're not going to tell you that because they don't want you to know you've been raped. And also, too, under the Fourth Amendment, they cannot take your fingerprints or photographs or anything like that until you actually have been served criminal charges. Traffic tickets and all that are not criminal charges. I watch a lot of these YouTube videos where these people out there going, well, a traffic ticket is a crime. If you didn't pay your taxes, that's a crime. Hate to tell you, folks, no, it's not. It's not a crime. Crime only happens when there's an injured party. No injured party, no crime. And so that's the one thing I don't get when people get into this terminology, that they go after and say, well, the Fourth Amendment, you don't have rights. The Fourth Amendment allows the cops to search your vehicle or your house or your person, your body, anytime they want. No, they have to have a crime to prove it. Like I said, they cannot do fingerprints. They cannot do photographs until after you've been charged with a real crime. Traffic violations and that misdemeanors are not crimes in any shape of the form. They are not crimes. And so when people sit there and go through this stuff and think that they're dealing with criminal activities, well, what is a criminal activity? What is crime? See, how do people sit there and determine this stuff because of the way they were wrongfully educated? Yes, I would say so. And so this has a lot of effect on what's going on with all of our Constitution and our amendments. The Democratic Party has been going out to try and eliminate the Constitution, and that's the one thing that people need to wake up to. And if Jeff Sessions, what I heard, if he did come out recently and nailed, I think it was the state of Oregon, California, Nevada, and Washington. Interesting that came up on the news brief. Either all four states that I have literally filed affidavits in over the last 10 years, 12 years, on criminal activities. And so Jeff Sessions did come out. He came out with an order and told every judge that was appointed by Obama, if they don't go by the Constitutional oath, they're going to prison. He gave them an option: do your honorable service to the people or go to prison, violating the Constitution, because a judge has to go by the Constitution first, and then the 14th Amendment second, because they have to determine if you're lawful or legal in this country. Because you have to determine if they're a legal immigrant or an illegal immigrant. And I've watched judges in my own county for illegal immigrants that even in car accidents killed people, and they let them walk out the courtroom that day, and next thing you know, when trying to go after them for the damages, they disappear. They go to another state, or they go back to Mexico until the heat blows over. And that's truly what happens. And these judges know it because, they don't care about you. They care about their retirement. They care about their paycheck more than they care about you. More than they actually care about the Constitution when it comes down to that, the way I believe and feel and what I've seen and witnessed. And so when we go through these traumatic experiences, and that's what it is, it's duress, it's depression, it's medical. It has medical implements into this stuff. And that's the one thing when you go through depression, how did it happen? What happened? It's like, I don't believe in drug and alcohol programs. I think they're a joke and a farce, and everybody's sitting there, I'm a drug addict, I'm an alcoholic. Quit whining. Be an adult. Be responsible. What? You're saying that you have no control over your mind and body? So you're giving it to a bottle or whatever substance it is. Well, what happened to personal responsibility and liability? You can't blame an inanimate object for something that you did. That's like when I watched some of these court cases over the last 40 years of, well, the woman got drunk, so she's entitled to be raped because she didn't know what's going on. Well, that depends on what the circumstances is. And no woman deserves to be raped under any circumstances. But a woman cannot go out and say that her body was violated when she was part of the structure that happened. And it's not being negative to the women in any fashion of the word, but it's called responsibility, knowing what you're doing. I mean, come on, we all grew up. We all went through those phases back when we were teenagers. A lot of us, the first drink we had and the first whatever joint or whatever you did was in a happy moment. And then all of a sudden, when life got turned around, it became a depression. And so you allowed it to happen. Yes, it probably snuck up on you, and then it's figuring out how to get over the hillside after that point, or the mountain, whatever you have to climb at that point. But that's why the Fourth Amendment is there to protect you in these situations. For an example, let's say if they go into a house and they got here's a good one. They go in, they get a warrant to search a garage for a car. And they decide to go searching inside the house, like the kitchen doors and stuff, and then they open up the freezer and they found some dope or a large sum of money. That the warrant never asked for that. They can't use that in court. That's fraud upon the court. And if you don't know what fraud upon the court is, I assert your rights to read it. Look it up. Read the history. Because that is fraud upon the court when a cop goes in and asks for a warrant and gets the warrant and the stuff ain't there, or it was an innocent man or a woman, maybe child. And so the cop committed fraud upon the court. And so when you write those structures up, you have to prove he committed fraud upon the court. You have to explain in writing how your Fourth Amendments were violated. You can't just put up a thing saying, my Fourth Amendment was violated. No, you have to put up the administrative rules. You have to put up exactly what happened, and then you put the court cases backing it up. Now you have evidence, and you have factual evidence, especially with notarized affidavit recorded of what transpired of your Fourth Amendment rights being violated. And see, that's the one thing that people think, that you could go to an attorney and do all this stuff. You have to file this stuff first. You have to create a record of evidence, of factual evidence. And remember, if you do lie or misuse the structure on this in any fashion, you can go to prison for it. And I mean prison, not county jail. Because you cannot lie on an affidavit. Because an affidavit is based on factual truth and evidence, not hearsay. And it cannot be used as hearsay. And there are people out there that on these videos, I keep watching these videos for the last couple of years, and all these people talking about, amendments and constitutional right. There are a few people that have got it right. A lot of people don't have it right at all, and especially when it comes to PVC and all these Democratic parties. And then you start doing the research on these things, and you start realizing that some of these things are coming from actual attorneys and lawyers that are, convincing you to think this. I mean, there are a lot of videos out there where you got these public servants out there telling you that, oh, you have a Fourth Amendment right, but that only entails that if a cop wants to say that you have probable cause. Probable cause means beyond a suspicion, beyond a feeling, beyond emotions. You have to probable cause means that you have a basic for factual evidence. And if there's no factual evidence, there's no probable cause. So that means, like, when you get pulled over and a cop says, I want to search your car, and then they find some, let's say, 2 pounds of marijuana in your car. Then they want to go get a warrant afterwards? They can't do it. That's illegal. Yes, illegal. That's the point of realizing what the separation of lawful and legal of your administrative rules are. And I mean, your administrative rules are because you have elected and public servants that work for you. And unless you ensure that right, they don't work for you. You have to prove that these public servants work for you. Or you have to prove that you're a legal immigrant and these public servants have to, abide by the 13th, 14th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd Amendment. And so long as that you're complying and going along with the other administrative rules, they have to protect you. And most people don't get that point. They think that they're beyond. A lot of people think that they don't have, rights. Well, you do. Immigration has privileges. We know that. But also, too, with the privileges, it is sitting there and knowing how these things work. I mean, it's like I watch a lot of people that have gone through the hassles or been involved in being arrested and going to jail, but they don't file this stuff correctly. It is knowing the separation of lawful and legal. And once you comprehend the structure of lawful and legal, then you're ahead of the game. And you have to know what's going on with this game and realize it is a game to these men and women that are in uniform, because they're finding a way to bring in income to justify their salaries, to justify whatever they are going through. And you have to realize they're going to do that all the way through the banks. Because remember, if they're not debt collectors for the banks, they don't have employment. And remember, when it comes to your Fourth Amendment, like, your title to your vehicle, taxes, and you're complying with all that, you're in the corporation system. So basically, they say you're volunteering giving up your rights, but if you don't know that you're doing that, you can't voluntarily give up your rights because you were not properly educated in that, and so these people lied to you. And that's deception. That is fraud, too. And so when you go through these things and comprehend these things of what's really going on, and this is the one thing I want to make sure that you're aware of, because they're trying to do, DHS is trying to pass federal and state bills, dealing with your biometrics, so that way they can take your blood and all that to see, how they're going to handle you. That violates your Fourth Amendment rights when they take your blood without a warrant. And that's the one thing that you have to realize, that when your Fourth Amendment is protected, it means a lot. And that means that you have to sit there and read and comprehend the stuff that is going on. And if you're not paying attention what's coming up here in the future, I mean, if you know what's going on in the East Coast and around the structure, it's interesting because all these things are being violated. I mean, on the East Coast, we got the fish washing up, dying, your food resources dying. So they're out to make us cannibals. So that way we're going to be shooting each other on the street. And so they're doing this deliberately. This is not just something that has been just done. This thing's been going on for years. And that is the one thing that you have to realize, that these things have been going on for years. This is not just something new. It's not new at all. These Democrats have been fighting over this structure to control you, your rights, your First, Second, Third Amendment rights. Because see, you gotta compromise and comprehend that these things were put in place to protect the British government, foreign agencies. They weren't put in place to protect you. And then once you start realizing that these things were put in place to protect you, not to be used against you, that's how you're going to end up starting to realize, because your Fourth Amendment right has a lot of significance. And that's the one thing that if you do get pulled over and if you do get harassed on these things or something does happen on this, you have to make sure that you know how to file your claim. And everybody says, well, you need to file, what is that, a complaint. Okay, you file their complaint by their structure, but you make sure you alter that claim. See, that is that you have to alter it. You have to sit there because it's a legal contract, Article 1, Section 2, and Section 10. It's a contract. So if you're not paying attention to the stuff that you're autographing and signing and doing this stuff, you're losing. And that is the one thing that we don't want to see this country lose. We don't want to see people going to jail for stupid stuff. We know there's a lot of people on the internet, like I mentioned, that talks about these amendments and these things that are going on, and they don't bring them up correctly. They don't tell you the bottom line truth. And so that's why it's so important to research. And that's the one thing that we hope to see, that the states start honoring their constitutional oath and teach, what is that? The Constitution. Because the Constitution needs to be taught in school. Constitution technically needs to start at the second grade level. Because at the second grade level, they're intelligent enough to know this stuff when they're 7, 8, 10, 12 years old. People say, no, they need their fun time. No, kids don't need the fun time. They need the fun time when they have fun time. They don't need fun time 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. This is not the Democratic transgender happiness hour. This is based on factual evidence. And that's the one thing that people need to know, that when an affidavit is filed, you are creating an evidence structure, and an affidavit has to, you have to put in the affidavit what you plan out of it. What are the charges? What is the remedies? What's the payoff? What's the circumstances of the remedies that you're asking for? See, these are very, very important things that people need to really comprehend. Because when it comes down to the 14th Amendment, and if you don't really comprehend that under Title Section 28, USC Section 3002, Washington, D.C. is a sovereign city and state, not bounded by laws and treaties of the 48 states. A lot of people put the 50 states in it, but Alaska and Hawaii are not part of us. They're part of the corporation of the banking industry. They are not of we the people. Britain has owned Hawaii for decades, years before we even showed up there. And Alaska's been no man's land, and, nobody could claim they own Russia, because Russia claims that they tried to own Alaska, but that's no man's land. Nobody's proven anything on that to our knowledge. And I've done a lot of research on that on both sides. So, your Fourth Amendment is your right to shut up. Because when you speak, you can violate your Fourth Amendment without even realizing it and agreeing to something you don't realize what you're agreeing to. And that's the one thing that most people don't comprehend, that they're agreeing to different things when they're not admitting to why are they agreeing to something that they shouldn't be agreeing to. And see, we agree to a lot of things we don't know what we're doing in conversations. That's why it's very important that when you speak, you have to rationally think these things out, what you're saying. Well, it's mainly because the Fourth Amendment does protect your right to travel. And so you want to realize that, a motor vehicle is, and some people, I always love it when people put a citizen's right all capitalized. But that shows you when you start reading this stuff, and people do this, you're reading how these people are not properly educated because they don't sit there and know the structure of the Constitution at all. Because if they're not defining lawful and legal, capital C, small c, the structure of the Constitution, the structure of administrative rules, they're not for your benefit. They're not there for you. And so that's the one thing that, when it comes down to it, what is it, Miller versus United States, 230 F 2D 486 489. A statute code cannot be converted into a crime. A constitutional right cannot be converted into a crime. Legal immigration privilege cannot be convicted or turned into a crime. See, that is the one thing that people don't get, that people sit there and they want to turn all this stuff into crimes when they don't even know what they're talking about. But your elected and public employees do it because they know that you're not educated. They know that you'll bow your head. You do what you're intimidated. You're brought up in fear because these men and women are armed. To me, that's called armed terrorism, because they're coming out to you to extort your rights, extort out of your wallet, to extort your public and private property. And the reason why I say public property, because your vehicle, if you have a title in that, it's public property. It's not yours. You don't own it. The public does. We, the people, own it. See, that's the one thing that most people don't get, all this stuff, how this stuff works. So, and that is the one thing I wanted to get into with dealing with the Fourth Amendment right before we start opening up the floor here. But there's a really good court case that just recently came out on the Fourth Amendment right, dealing with smart meters. That says basically they cannot put a smart meter on your home. It violates your Fourth Amendment right because they know personally they're taking information off of that smart meter. They're sitting there electronically taking it off of everything you do. Yes, they are. They're monitoring you from your home. And if you got a Samsung TV or something like that, you're in bigger trouble because everything's monitored. Samsung TVs and radios and all their structure, they have remotes on it to turn it off, but I don't believe they get turned off, my opinion, my knowledge. Because I don't believe it gets turned off, to tell you the truth. Because it is one of those things that people don't get, that to protect themselves, they have to know this. So the Seventh Circuit Court, Administrative Court, came out with a landslide on the Seventh Circuit Court decision. Says the Fourth Amendment applies to smart meter data. Do you comprehend? Smart meter data. So they're running everything off that smart meter for their own personal knowledge. And your public employees, like the state of Oregon governor and these people, they know it because they pay all this money, that taxpayer-funded instruments, to run these instruments and run this information over you. That is the one thing that they want to be able to control you. Same thing with religion in the Bible. They want to control you. Religion wants to control you. And when they got you controlled, everybody knows what happens when religion controls you. Come on, let's be realistic here. Let's not live in an old fantasy world. Because we have to be realistic here. And so when these things start coming around and you start realizing that this is real, what's going on. This is a fact that is happening right now in your life. Real, that's happening. Then when people get pulled over and they freak out because they don't know what's going on, they're afraid to answer their structures or the truth. Your public employees don't want you to know the truth. Because if you did, they couldn't make their living, their income. And that's what they care about more, because without that retirement and income, you got to realize an elected and public servants' jobs, those are man-made fictions that are created to protect you and I, to protect the immigrants, to protect lawful and legal men and women. That's what they're there for, to protect we the people. They're not there to protect churches. They are not there to protect public employees. And by the way, an elected and public employee, county commissioner, senator, congressman, anybody who's a public employee contractor, it's very simple, cannot hire a lawyer. Remember, lawyers are liars. And that's the one thing, they cannot hire lawyers. They have to represent themselves. They have to personally be there and represent themselves. And so that's the one thing that most people don't comprehend, representing oneself. So that means you're there liable. You cannot create an excuse. You can't create a structure that says, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. You can't do it. It doesn't work. That's not reality, because your job is not to protect the corporation unless you are a corporate member. And that's what these men and women do. They protect one another. They're corporation members. So they want to protect them more than they want to protect you. And that is a fact. It's not a joke. And that's the one thing that most people don't get when it comes down to the structure of the real world. Because the real world really doesn't exist unless you have a constitutional right. Every other place in the world is run by dictatorship, run by a master. Every place in the world is run by a master. But once you realize that you're not the slave, your freedom starts coming. But that means you have to educate yourself daily on this stuff, and your children and those around you who are willing to listen and participate. Because remember, not everybody is willing to participate in this stuff because they don't know how to be responsible. They don't know how to be liable. So that is the one thing that you want to get this thing said out to the general public so you know your rights. So it's like the smart meters and the stuff that they put up. I mean, like the 5G towers they're putting up right now across the country, and all these TV programs and all this stuff, are sitting there and telling you that we're going to spy on you. Your cell phone, when you sign that cell phone contract, unless you specifically sign on that contract, you have a Fourth Amendment right of protection. You gave up your Fourth Amendment right in that contract. Okay? When you sign to a TV company, you're giving up your Fourth Amendment right to that TV company unless you clarify if you got Samsung or some of these other new TVs, radio system, or what is that new thing that they got out with that lady's voice, something voice. I'm thinking about it. SNL did a joke on it, and these people think it's a wonderful device. But device, I will think about it here in a minute. But that device is not there for you. Go ahead. Yeah, exactly. Alexa, yeah. And those things are not there to protect you. They're recording every transaction you're doing electronically or voiced. And so when you agree to that, you gave up your rights. And people, oh no, I have a right. No, read the contract. Read the fine print in the contract too. See, I watch these TV commercials that Alexis and SLL, Saturday Night Live did a wonderful one on that one. And they actually did, get into about you give up your rights when you do Alexis. which I was shocked when I watched that. I did that a couple years back. And I was actually shocked when I watched it, because they actually admitted to that you give up your rights. And so you have to be very careful with everything. It's like your credit cards and all this stuff. They want to put you in electronic transfer. That's why they're trying to put in the chip, even for people for employment. And remember, if you're an employee, you don't have to abide by that. And they go, okay, they're going to lose your job. Well, you have to file that lawsuit the next day. You have to know that they cannot take blood, skin samples, hair samples, excuse me, anything like that, without a signed warrant by a lawful judiciary or a grand jury. And I mean that it has to be presented in such a fashion that the evidence is overwhelming, not just a thought and theory, what they call probable cause. I had a thought, so it gives me the right probable cause to search you. No, it does not. See, that is the one thing that when people comprehend this stuff and they get this stuff and they start putting this stuff together and realizing the separation of church and state, because the church is not supposed to be in your state government at all. And for those people who think it does and try to convince you, oh, religion, we need to have religion, that invaded our country. That violated we, the natives, Fourth Amendment rights, not privileges. So you have to comprehend this stuff when this stuff violates your rights. People came in this country and started making these administrative rules. That's why the Constitution and treaties were in place to protect our rights, not privileges. Privileges are only for the corporation members, and it even says in federal court cases and congressional records and all that is all true. It's all out there. It's all said. It's fact. It's not hearsay evidence. So a lot of people go off of hearsay evidence and try to get you involved in hearsay evidence. Don't get involved in hearsay evidence. Don't play these corporation games. So if you want to have your Fourth Amendment protected, you have to protect it. An attorney ain't going to protect your Fourth Amendment rights. Attorney cannot do that or protect your Fourth Amendment rights. He cannot do that corporation at all. Because the attorney works for the court system, de facto Article I court system. And when you go into an Article IV court system, basically you have to defend yourself, because no attorney is going to defend you in an Article IV court system at all. And that's where people have to come to real life, real truth. Because the attorney is not there to protect you. Attorney is there to protect their job, their security, their best interests. That's why when you get kidnapped and held for ransom and you go to court and they say, well, you were driving without a license. An attorney is supposed to sit there and defend you, get you out of jail as soon as possible, but they don't, because they get paid while you're in jail. See, while you're sitting in jail, everybody gets paid. The judge, the clerk, the sheriff deputy, your attorney, anybody involved in your case, anybody transferring paperwork or phone calls. That violates your Fourth Amendment rights. That's even when you're in jail and they're violating your Fourth Amendment rights by recording your conversations and tape recording that before you were actually convicted by a jury, not a judge. You can always make a plea bargain, but a jury has to convict and indict you. A judge cannot do that. A judge is an independent mediator. He doesn't have judicial authority in that capacity. Doesn't have the authority to sit there and dictate to you, because a judge cannot sign affidavit. A judge cannot sign, or an attorney or a police officer, nobody can sign an affidavit on that without evidence. And technically, they can't sign an affidavit for you. The injured party has to sign the affidavit. Or if the injured party is that mentally incapable, then that's plausible, but then that man or woman has to sign and autograph their rights over to that individual. But they don't want you to know that right. They don't want you to know that law. And so when you don't know this stuff, this is how we all get in trouble. And I've been down that road myself. I mean, I've been down the road of hard knocks before I opened my eyes and started paying attention to the real truth instead of what was led to believe to me. And that's the one thing that most people need to realize, that you need to open up your mind compared to what you've been led to believe. Because people sit there and go, I have a Fourth Amendment right to a public servant. Well, what's your right of the Fourth Amendment you're claiming? What part of the Fourth Amendment are you actually claiming for that right? So you have to really comprehend and read this stuff and realize that when you're writing these affidavits or criminal charges on these elected and public servants, you have to list the injury that they caused you, including when you're kidnapped and held for ransom. And that's public slander. That's defamation of character. You know, even a traffic ticket, that's defamation of character. And so that's the one thing I don't see how come people don't get this so easy, how it works. But I do see that they don't get it because they don't read. They don't educate themselves. They've been blocked from real education. Our school system has failed in this country since the school board took over in 1968. That's when the Democrats, after Kennedy was assassinated, started really moving to take this country back over in a democracy to destroy the republic form of government, because they know in a republic form of government, they lose their standing. They lose their rights, and they don't want you to know that. And that's the one thing that when they're sitting there lying to you and protecting their own, they're not supposed to do that technically, even by federal law. They're supposed to turn in violations and code breakers, especially when somebody committed a crime against, what would that be? That would be a crime against your rights to travel. That means the cop committed a crime. Those are crimes. Those are not violations that people get led to believe of a violation. See, that's the one thing when a judge or a cop will tell you, don't worry about it. It's just a violation. It's not going to hurt your record. Oh, bullshit. Your violation goes on the computer. That's how they come after you to make money. They want to be able to come after you for their income, their salary. That's how they make their livelihood, is off of you. Okay, I get the point. So anyhow, why don't we go ahead and open up the floor? Oh, yeah, put the video up. Yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you for the clarification. That's right. I know.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. Who there? It's the Fourth Amendment, baby, as the Constitution for Dummies series rolls on forward. Wherever you stand on the issues, guys, we want you to stand smart. And that starts with knowing the text of the Constitution. So let's read it, let's interpret it, let's look at it. Giddy up, I'm ready to do the teaching. Are you ready to do the learning? Here, let's do it right now. All right, before we look at the words of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which is basically about search and seizure, we really want to give credence to the British for getting us the Fourth Amendment, because they were using something during colonial times called writs of assistance. And these issued warrants based basically just innuendo and reasonable suspicion, were being exploited by the British to go through suspected smugglers' stuff. This is a reaction to kind of the taxing issue that's going on in the 1760s in colonial America, and the British are pissed and they're going through our stuff and they're using these flimsy writs of assistance. So that experience of not having clear language about what gives the permission of the government to go through my stuff, my castle, turns into the Fourth Amendment. So let's look at the words, pay attention, they're really important. Bang!
The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
All right, so we have very specific language, and in a moment we're going to look at three basic questions. What constitutes search and seizure? You have to activate search and seizure in order to need that search warrant. And then B, if we do have enough evidence, what does that rise to in terms of probable cause? What does probable cause mean? And thirdly, what happens if the police ignore this? If there's not a good search warrant, is there any repercussions? So if we look at selective incorporation, and selective incorporation is this concept that the 14th Amendment and the clause, the due process clause, no state shall deny its citizens due process, is going to create an opportunity for the court, through judicial review in the Warren Court, to basically take that Fourth Amendment and to make some universal kind of national rules about what search and seizure really means and what's going to occur if the police violate that rule. So let's take a look at the basic rules of search and seizure. What is search? So a court case called Smith versus Mary is what really defines whether search and seizure is going to rise to the level where you're going to need a search warrant. And basically what the court says is that two things have to occur before we even go to search warrants and then talk about probable cause. The first is that there's an individual expectation of privacy, that you expect what you're doing is guarded. And then second, that society expects that as well, that there's kind of a national acceptance of this principle that this activity is protected under the Fourth Amendment. These rules do kind of like breathe a little bit. Let's look at how they breathe out and expand your rights. They expand your rights first in Weeks versus the United States, where basically what the court's going to say in 1914, that is if the federal agents find evidence illegally without a search warrant, you can't use that evidence at trial. And this is interpreting the words of the Fourth Amendment. Now, if you're a strict interpretationalist, and sometimes I'll hear people online talking about how we have to follow the letter of the Constitution, that there is nowhere in the Fourth Amendment a clause that states if you don't have a search warrant, you find evidence, what happens to that evidence. So Mapp versus Ohio, 1961, is the court case that expands this to the states. We've talked about this in other lectures. Selective incorporation. The court using the 14th Amendment, and the 14th Amendment has this language, no state shall deny its citizens equal protection and due process under the law. So in 1961, there was a little old lady named Mapp, and the police went to her house without a warrant. They were looking for a suspect in a crime, and she wanted a search warrant. They gave her a phony search warrant, and then they ripped the lady's house apart. And they ended up in her basement going through her drawers. They find a chest. They open it up, and inside is dirty magazines, obscene pornography at the time, #ew. She's a nasty, dirty little old lady. But in this court case, what she's going to argue is that no state, Ohio, shall deny me, Mrs. Mapp, due process under the law, meaning that if you don't have a search warrant, there has to be a repercussion, and that repercussion the court is going to decide is the expansion of the exclusionary rule. You've seen it on Law and Order a million times. So in Terry versus Ohio, guys, what the court did was they limited the Fourth Amendment by saying that the police didn't need a search warrant when it came to kind of these short-term encounters, that if the cops have reasonable suspicion to think that you're a flight risk or that there's evidence that you might be a danger to them or something like that, that they had the right for their own protection to do a pat-down and not needing a search warrant to do that, or to stop you for questioning, or maybe look in the glove box if they felt there was a threat there or something like that. What becomes interesting is that they do need reasonable suspicion. They need some type of fact to grab onto. So I've seen videos on YouTube. You probably can check out the link below. I'll put it in the description where a law student carrying a gun basically tells the police or asks the police, what right do you have to ask me anything? Right? What did I do wrong? And the cop says some people called and said there was a guy with a gun. He says, I was the guy with a gun. I have a license. Can I go? And he says, I'd like to see some ID. He says, I don't have to give you ID. Why am I going to give you ID? No, what did I do wrong? If I did something wrong, tell me what I did wrong, I'll give you ID. And he was really standing on the Fourth Amendment, saying that if this is a search and seizure, if you're stopping me and getting in the middle of my natural right life, you need a reason. So, I don't know if you should try it out there on the streets, guys, but that's what happened. So where do you have this expectation of privacy? And that's really what comes down to the Katz decision. This is really where they expanded search warrants from not just a physical location but to the individual. I believe that they had wiretapped the outside of a phone booth, and they were trying to get this dude, I guess Katz, and he went into the phone booth. He thought that he was having a private conversation and it was being recorded, and the police said, we don't need a search warrant because we're not invading this guy's home. It's a public area. And what the judges said in that court case was that there was an expectation of privacy. So if you have an expectation of privacy, then in a sense they need a search warrant. And of course we've defined that further by saying there's a societal expectation as well. Are there exceptions to search warrants? Of course there are. We can't kid ourselves. For instance, there's the plain view doctrine. So if you have your curtains open and you're in the window and you are, stabbing the guy, and you see the police and you're like, yo, what's up? Hey, yo, how are you? They don't need a warrant to come in, right? Not only is that going to be plain view, but that's going to be what's basically emergency circumstances. That's another rule. You don't need a warrant if someone's screaming bloody murder inside a home. You also have a consent exception. So, of course, this is what the police want you to do. Ma'am, do you mind if we look through the trunk? Yeah, you're done. They're going to look for the trunk and they have the legal right to. You also have court cases like U.S. versus Leon, which in the 1980s created a good faith exception to the search warrant. So if the police are acting in good faith and they think they have a good search warrant and they go to 400 Main Street when they should be going to 300 Main Street, but I don't know, a raindrop hit the number, that the evidence seized at that wrong address is going to be used in court because the cops didn't do it with bad faith. It was an honest mistake. You also have the court case Nix versus Williams. In Nix versus Williams, you have the inevitable discovery doctrine. That basically, if you have a bad warrant, but they were going to find that evidence anyway, maybe they were doing house-to-house searches for some legal reason, I don't know, that evidence can be put into trial as well. But there's also been some wins for the people. Recently, there was a court case that examined whether or not the cops could put a GPS monitor on your car. And that was struck down. They said no, that you had an expectation of privacy when you're driving around, that you're not being GPSed. There was another court case where they couldn't get a search warrant, so what the cops would do is they bring drug dogs to the front of your door. And then the dog would be like, rough, drugs in the house. And they'd use that to get the search warrant. And the court struck that down. They said that was an invasion of privacy. The Fourth Amendment rocks the party that rocks the party. Because not only is it a great amendment to talk about when you're talking about your most very basic freedoms, your house is your castle, but you have all of these current events which just kind of smack right into it. So what do you think? Is the NSA and what they're doing collecting data in order to protect us from terrorism? Is that a violation of the Fourth Amendment? Is there an expectation of privacy there on the internet? Is there a societal expectation of privacy? One other thing worth mentioning is the FISA courts. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of, I believe it's 1978, created a special court system. So if there's some type of threat of maybe domestic terrorism with foreign influences, invading the country or infiltrating the country, that you don't need to go through the ordinary ways to get a search warrant. You can go to this secret court. You can even go, I believe, 24 hours after the fact that you got the evidence, that you went in without a warrant. You get the warrant after the fact. And basically, this secret court has approved thousands of search warrants with probably very little evidence, and a lot of people don't know because it's not transparent. So there's certainly that to worry about, too. So certainly, that's kind of another layer on this monkey. Layer on the monkey. After 9/11, the FISA courts were expanded, and using kind of the threat of terrorism, Bush and Obama have used the FISA court to kind of get around some of the probable cause restrictions that the Fourth Amendment has for domestic issues. Makes it a little bit easier.
Okay, I take it that's the end of it. Okay. Well, I like to bring one valid point up with the FISA courts. The Supreme Court just came out a couple weeks ago and said the FISA courts don't have any authority, cannot even be a participant. So that is a new victory for the people, too, because the FISA courts don't have any authority at all. That was determined just recently by the Supreme Court. We'll get it up there. I put it on my Facebook sites and emailed it out to others. But the FISA court has no authority whatsoever. Supreme Court just come out and determined that. So it is paying attention to these court decisions. And remember, they are opinions and decisions, and some of them that are basically protecting your rights. And so we want to thank the guy for the video. He does a good job. We got more that we'll be putting up next week. I got 3 videos for next week on the Fifth Amendment. But this is a point that you need to realize and accept the fact that you have to be responsible. So you have to produce your facts and evidence. You have to bring your statement true. So if a warrant is issued, you have to ask for the warrant. And so the one thing the gentleman did not bring up in that deal is the warrant has to be handed to you, not a copy, cannot be a copy. It has to be original in wet ink. And the courts have determined that one. Because you don't know who's doing a photocopy, what's been done on it. Neither do the courts, technically, unless the judge has a wet ink stamp on it and it can be verified. And see, that's the one thing that when they come to your home and stuff, they don't verify certain things. So you have a right to make those phone calls and verify it. So before you allow them in, too. So anyhow, the floor is open. Anybody's got any comments or thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm rushing it, running ahead.
All participants are unmuted.
Yeah, it won't be the first time, won't be the last time. But anybody got any comments or thoughts on this?
Ed.
Floor, go ahead.
Yeah. What about? I've heard some cops say that they got a warrant, but it's electronic.
No. It has to be wet ink. Supreme Court has determined that. You can do electronics for transfer of payments, electronic on identification and stuff, but you cannot do it for a warrant. A warrant has to be written in hand, and it has to be presented. When it's presented by electronics, that is a copy. It's not original. So, because all they're going to do is print it out, so it's not original. To my comprehension, to my research and what I've done. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Or? Go ahead.
What about If somebody, husband and wife get in an argument, there was some physical but very little anything to notice. Wife goes out, calls the police. Police come over, no witnesses, but police come in and just arrest the male. Do they need a warrant for that?
Well, actually, she needs to sign an affidavit first of injury and prove damages. They can't just arrest anybody for the corporation gain of a private jail.
But then also, shouldn't there be evidence that she was harmed in some way?
Right. Yes. Absolutely. There has to be evidence, because they might take you away for the night, basically, until you're OR'd or bailed, but then you go after them on that one. But she has to sign an affidavit. She has to swear that the incident happened, the injury happened. She can't say it alleged.
Okay, so then what would make a county prosecutor want to pick something up like that?
Why would the county pick something up like that? Because they're making income off it. I mean, you never see. That's the one thing you need to see: a real affidavit filed. You need to request that. You need to insert your right. That's why I always suggest to people: always see the affidavit that's filed against you. And like I said, a district attorney, any public employee cannot do it unless the person is mentally retarded or incapable or incapacitable. So does that answer a little further for you?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, but see, the thing is that people got to comprehend there has to be an affidavit filed. Otherwise, it's hearsay, and it's technically not accepted in court, and that's why people need to challenge hearsay in a court. That's why people need to challenge to see the affidavit. You want to see proof. You want to see the facts. You don't want to see hearsay. And so when they do hearsay, that is the disturbing part that people get around and get away with right now today. I mean, so many people get assaulted, kidnapped, and held for ransom by the police department because of hearsay. And then there's been people that have been falsely accused of robberies, and they were shot on the spot. Some of them were killed. There was no affidavit filed, and they proved that they were not the individual that they were actually looking for. So, and that's a criminal matter with a wrongful death suit. And so that is like what the gentleman said too, with probable cause on that, if they have probable cause suspicion. But when a public employee pulls out their service revolver or pistol, they need to be 100% sure of what they're doing, because when you put your finger on that trigger, it's a life and death situation. There's no ifs, ands, or buts when that goes off. Because the ifs, ands, and buts stop when that arm discharges. So anybody else got anything they'd like to add into this? Nobody else? Okay. Well, I guess we hit it pretty good then. So with that, if nobody's got nothing to say, we'll try it one more time. Nobody's got anything to say.
Hey, Mr. Ed.
Go ahead.
Do me a favor. Give me a call tomorrow afternoon, please.
Oh, okay, no problem.
And check your instant message.
I will do that.
I'll be giving you something else tomorrow.
Okay.
Bye.
Talk to you then. All right, and then, but anyhow, then with that, we'll just call it an evening, and may the Great Spirit and Mother Earth bless you, look over you. May the Creator protect you. Because without the Creator, none of us would have the Constitution. Yeah, I know.